Um, I am very excited to welcome you to tonight's program, which is presented by the Dartmouth Asian Pacific American Alumni Association, or DAPAAA. My name is Ariel Xue. I'm a class of 2008, and I have the honor of moderating tonight. I'm the immediate past chair of DAPAAA and have been involved in some form with DAPAAA since 2008 when I graduated. Tonight's program is going to be a dialogue between alumni and current students about the past, present, and future of the AAPI community at Dartmouth. Through this dialogue, we are very excited to celebrate and touch on the surface of an incredibly rich and vibrant history, which started in 1899 with the first graduate of Asian descent from Dartmouth. I am already seeing a lot of familiar faces and new faces tonight, and I want to encourage everyone to introduce themselves in the chat. Please share information about your own experience at Dartmouth, what you were involved in, and we encourage you to type your live reactions and reflections in the chat throughout the course of the program. So without further ado, we are going to get started with special opening remarks from one of the original co-founders of DAPAAA, Doug Chia, class of '93. Doug is currently a consultant in the field of corporate governance. He is a senior fellow at the Center of Corporate Law and Governance at Rutgers Law School and a former assistant general counsel and corporate secretary for Johnson & Johnson. Doug is also the proud parent to twins in the Dartmouth class of 2025. Doug.
All right. Thanks so much, Ariel. And thanks everyone for being here. This is really amazing to see. So I'm just going to kick this off, and then we can get into our kind of the main event here. So the DAPAAA, or Dartmouth Asian Pacific American Alumni Association, this started back in January of 1998, and we had our first meeting at the Dartmouth/Yale Club in New York City. Sent an invite out, had really no idea who was coming, if anybody. And this was after a number of months of just kind of, base organization with two of my classmates, Minju Lee and David Xue. And this came after, I was on the Alumni Council for a while, and the president of the Alumni Council, Joel Levitt, class of '50, he came up to me and said, "We don't have Asian Alumni Association. We need one. You're going to start it." And Nels Armstrong over here, class of '71, and he was the director of alumni relations. He's going to help. And, if he doesn't help, come back to me. So I was like, okay, I guess. And so that's really how it started. Now, it's significant because at the time, there were only three affinity groups, Dartmouth alumni affinity groups. One was BADA, Black Alumni at Dartmouth Association. There was NAD, Native American Alumni Association of Dartmouth, and DGALA, Dartmouth Gay and Lesbian Alumni Organization. And the college did not want any more. Up until that point, the policy was, try to keep everything centralized, everything controlled. A lot of it had to do with, if funds are coming in, the college, alumni relations, they wanted to control all that. At some point, people realized the error of that way of thinking. And then that's how we were able to start and eventually gain recognition, which required applying for recognition. So it took a little while for this to happen. And there were a number of people involved who were really instrumental. There was a woman named Glenna Chang in alumni relations who was there for a pretty short time. But she was really instrumental. Sarah Cho, she was 97, kind of one of the first people to kind of create a succession, which we had no idea where that was going. But anyway, you'll hear more about this history of the organization as we go on. But this event here is a virtual kickoff for our 25th year anniversary. And there'll be a whole series of special events planned between now and May of 2024. And May of 2024, specifically May 3rd through 5th, is going to be our reunion and conference in Hanover. And the theme is going to be Our History, Our Voices, Our Future. And so we will have Zoom events between now and then, just displaying a whole variety of aspects of the history of Asians at Dartmouth, current students at Dartmouth, some alumni that have gone on to do really amazing things. And for May of 2024, we have, the kind of big reveal here. One of the speakers we've managed to secure, George Takei, actor, author, probably one of the most prominent Asian Pacific American activists today, very outspoken, especially during the Trump years. He's going to be a future Montgomery Fellow. And so he will be on campus for a chunk of time and coincides with our conference. So very fortunate. And in terms of other speakers, we are working on a number of them. Can't confirm them yet, but you can imagine who some of the people we're trying to get are. And if you have any connections or relationships with classmates or others who have gone on to do incredible things, more incredible than me, at least, please let us know, and we can try to invite them as well. So it's over the last 25 years, it's been a rich history of Dartmouth, Asians at Dartmouth, and Dartmouth alumni. So I will stop talking and turn it back over to Ariel. But thanks everyone for being here.
Thank you so much, Doug, for your introduction and for starting the DAPAAA organization. We're super grateful to you. At this point, I would love to introduce you to Professor Sunmin Kim and Daniel Lin, 23, who was the TA for the Sociology 76 class offered in the winter of 2023, Asian American Student Activism at Dartmouth. And I'd like to start with Daniel and just invite you to give us an introduction to what the motivation was behind the class and how it came to fruition.
Yeah, for sure. So this project really came out of my involvement in the current iteration of Student Activists for Asian American Studies, which is the Dartmouth Asian American Studies Collective. I joined the organization, which was founded by Monacy Shino and Lily Wren, both are fellow 23s with me. And so when we started the organization, we knew we were not the first people to be activists for this cause, but we didn't know exactly what that history was. So about 1 year ago in winter 2022, I did like a personal just adventure in Toronto just to look at what was there and see who had come before us. And that ultimately turned into my sociology culminating independent study, which was this past fall in 22F. And over the course of that, there's actually a few people here who I interviewed for that project on this Zoom right now. But I interviewed 19 people who were alumni, former staff members, current faculty members, and as well as digging through some other Runner archives and things online. And I was interested in a few questions, such as how did activists burn out, or how did they not burn out? How did they transfer knowledge between generations? Especially, I'm a 23, so I'm about to graduate. And how do we transfer this generational knowledge and help have this movement not fizzle out as it has sort of cyclically done at Dartmouth? How did they handle these interpersonal conflicts? What were their strategies in organizing? So I was asking all these sorts of questions. And what soon became clear to both me and Professor Kim is that this was a lot more work and a lot deeper than myself could ever like hope to encapsulate. And so instead of like writing like a big paper that was hoping to like contextualize the movements at Dartmouth within other ethnic studies movements, we ended up just brainstorming and coming together to create the Soci 76 class, which I guess Professor Kim can talk more about. But yeah.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Turning to Professor Kim, can you tell us briefly just about your research interests, and can you introduce us to what the students did in this course that you taught, and also situate us in why this was a sociology course as opposed to a history class, given how much archival work the students did?
Yes, so I'm a sociologist who studies race and immigration in the United States, and I primarily use the historical method to reconstruct the past experiences so we can understand how we arrived at this point that we have in our present. And one of my main research projects is to understand like a contemporary immigration policy, and then you have a direct historical precedent in the early 20th century in terms of exclusion and the violence exercised to the people who are trying to get into the country. And in terms of a Social 76 project titled the Asian American Student Activism, when Daniel first came to me with his stuff, and as we were having the conversations about what he was hearing from the alums and finding in the Rauner, we immediately thought that this was exactly the same as what we are seeing in today's campus climate. Some of the feelings that we were able to unearth in the archives were the feelings that we were going through as a faculty and the students of Asian descent. And we wanted to scale it up to see if we can do more work and unearth like more stuff from the archives and from the interviews. And that's how we got to the this 16-person class. And I think the central question that we had as a group in going into the this project was to ask like who we are and then where we are as a group, like who's interested in like a presence of the Asians and Asian Americans in this campus, and then trying to carve out the space for this group. And we have found that our attempts are not we are not alone, basically. Like there were people who have done exactly the same things that we were trying to do, have felt exactly the same way that we felt in some of our efforts. And that establishing that connection, explaining the foundation of our present was the core research question in our inquiry. And that's why I think this is more of a sociology than the history, because as I always like to say, we are trying to do the history of the present, not just the gather the facts from the past, but understand the past in order to make sense of the history, and then hopefully go beyond the present, and then are carving out the new possibilities and the spaces. So that's what we were trying to do. And then I have to say that I was really blessed to teach this course, because students seem to have enjoyed like their experiences, but I was able to really like cherish my opportunity to be involved in this course, because I was able to real time witness how these freshmen and sophomores were intellectually and personally growing over this course of this project. And in their pivotal stages of college career, they were I could see them becoming different basically over the short span of the 10 weeks. And then you don't really get to see that happen as a educator almost ever in today's college environment. And I feel really blessed to witness that. And that ironically made me invest more in the college as an institution, because as you can imagine, the history of Asian American activism and the presence in the college is at best a checkered history. It's not the rosy story of everyone being happy. But at the same time, these students and their passion to change the community that they identify with just made me, see the hope in the institution and the potential that the Dartmouth College still retains among this particular group of students.
Thank you for that, Professor Kim. I'm sure we can all think of professors from Dartmouth that have changed our lives, and think about sort of the moment when we've had, key realizations about ourselves and our communities. So thank you for serving in that role. And we're really lucky to have 4 of the students, actually probably more in the audience, but 4 student speakers today who are going to reflect on the work that they did in the Sociology 76 class with Professor Kim and with Daniel. And I'm going to turn to them now. And again, I would love to see people put live reactions in the chat and, put down your recollections of your own experience at Dartmouth. And yeah, without further ado, I'm going to turn first to Anton Nguyen, who is a 26. Anton worked on the Symbolic Expressions of Activism exhibition, and we will share the link to the exhibition in the chat. So basically, the students created 4 digital exhibitions, which are going to be permanently available on the library's website. They just launched the physical exhibition today, so we're grateful that you're with us on a very exciting and busy day. So Anton, when you and I spoke in preparation for today's program, you conveyed that your group observed a decline in institutional support for Asian American artistic expression on campus. But you also observed that at the same time, there is a very deep history and legacy of vibrant Asian American student expression on campus. Can you talk a little bit about what institutional support for Asian American artistic expression enabled historically, and also talk about what you see now from students who are engaging in symbolic and artistic expression?
Yeah, of course. That's a really salient question, I think, and like this sort of like gamut of Asian American production and creativity, from like moments of ebb and flow, moments of like high production and moments of lower production, is like a really kind of unifying theme of what the artistic and symbolic expressions of activism exhibit group kind of saw. But I guess if I could begin to answer this question, I would I'll share my screen real quick, and I'll share actually a sample of what we kind of found in our archival research. And I'll first let the clip speak for itself. So is audio working for everyone? All right, great, thank you.
What is this? Hey. This is not cold. Stop. Stop. What is this stuff? Taking diaphragm and then. What is it? Not a drug? E. E and ecstasy. E. Yeah. You're making ecstasy in my bedroom.
So forgive the content there, but I guess like if y'all kind of imagine Asian American art, thinking of kind of constructs we've come to know, like the model minority, these sort of like dominant visions of Asian Americans, would it surprise y'all to hear that this clip involving only Asian American student actors about a student finding out that his roommate was making ecstasy in his bedroom was from the Dartmouth College in the Hopkins Center for the Arts in 2001. And I see some of y'all talking about this in the chat, but yes, this is a clip from Achievers by Far Off Broadway. That is Gerald Lamb. And Far Off Broadway was Dartmouth's first Asian American performance and theater group, founded at the turn of the century. I also see like we have Morna, Morna Ha speaking there, but Morna Ha was a member of Far Off Broadway. But some of y'all from around the 2000s may remember seeing these performances live each term. But this is kind of an example we found in the archives, and it just really represents like sort of this height of Asian American artistic production on campus during like the 2000s. Since the 2000s, Dartmouth really hasn't seen anything like Far Off Broadway, or for example, the Asian American Literary Magazine, which was active at the time, which was called Main Street. Despite having more Asian American students on campus today than we've ever had before, we're at about 22% of the student body now. We don't even have culture nights that many of y'all will remember, hosted by the Dartmouth Asian Organization anymore. But the kind of like decline in the current like landscape of Asian American art isn't to say that Asian American students aren't making art or like are lacking a creative impulse. We actually have a wealth of Asian American performances, and a lot of these are in senior thesis projects in theater and music. Daniel didn't mention this earlier, but he actually like orchestrated the kind of results from the Soci 76 exhibit, and also kind of his research into Asian American activism and history at Dartmouth into a performance, a musical performance in 4 movements that he just performed last night. And we have like thesis performances, we have like submissions to Asian American submissions to, for example, like campus poetry magazines, such as like Stone Fence and Spare Rib. that said, while we still have this level, like a continuous level of Asian American artistic investment and production, compared to the era of Far Off Broadway, compared to the era of Main Street, we lack the strong sense of sort of an Asian American creative community that tied these artistic works together. In other words, we're prolific, but we're disconnected. If you look into the archives, it's really a very specific set of declines in Dartmouth's administrative support for the Asian American community that has led to this fragmented campus landscape of Asian American art making. Achievers was only possible, like Far Off Broadway's performance was only possible through a co-sponsorship with the drama department and the Hopkins Center for the Arts, who provided like directing and a venue for the performance. From the 2000s to the early 2010s, OPAL, the Office of Pluralism and Leadership, had its staff about cut in half from about 20 full-time employees to 7 today. And the position of a Pan-Asian student advisor, which was occupied by Nora Yasamura, as many of y'all know, for more than 10 years, no longer exists anymore. Completing the research for this exhibit, we've gotten the privilege of getting to be more familiar with the wealth of artistic and cultural history of Asian American artists here at Dartmouth. And this is a history that, like I wanted to stress, is otherwise unremembered by the school. And it's been really comforting and great to see this lineage before us. But comparing, I guess, all of this, like these moments of vibrancy and vitality of Asian American art on campus to the Asian American artistic community today, it shows us what we don't have and but also what our campus was once capable of. What we know from this work is that our community is full of creativity and the impulse for art is there and has always been there. It's just that right now, what we need most is Dartmouth to provide the robust administrative support and care to foster a sustainable Asian American creative community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anton. There's a lot of great points to digest, and you mentioned Nora Yasamura, who is in the room with us, and so many of us remember all of the support Nora gave us when she supported us when we did the culture nights, and we went to her office and got leadership advice from her, and she just had every single hat ever that was ever created. So thank you, Nora, for all of your contributions. And thank you, Anton, for those reflections. I would love to turn to Xian Bloom, who's a 94, and hear from her about her reflections. And Xian is a 94. She is from a family of Vietnamese refugees, immigrants. She's the director of publishing operations at Johns Hopkins University Press. And Xian received an award for her internship program in publishing for first generation and limited income students. Xian, can you share with us how your time at Dartmouth influenced your path to publishing? And can you reflect on the importance of documenting and telling Asian American stories, as sort of Anton highlighted, these stories can be a vehicle for combating stereotypes and presenting different sides of the Asian American community.
Thank you. So my time, sorry, I have a bit of a cold. My time at Dartmouth, I think, influenced my later career, in many different ways, but one way was in what was missing. I grew up in upstate New York, so we were the only Vietnamese family in town. And so I went to Dartmouth and I was thinking, well, they've got something like 4% Asians there. So that's more than I've ever grown up with. And it's also such a elite school and a lot of resources and funding. And so I think I really went there expecting more in terms of what I could learn about being Asian, about my background, about the history. And so a big part of it was finding that there wasn't more there, and not necessarily because Dartmouth didn't have it, but it just wasn't there. And so it was very hard to sort of find things. I remember I see in the comments that someone mentioned that in the 90s they were advocating for Korean as a language. And I remember I showed up at the language lab and asked them if they had any Vietnamese language resources. And they said no. And they said, probably the next one they might add on would be Korean. So I would have to wait a bit. So it was things like that. So a lot of, but I think a key thing about Dartmouth too, in terms of, it's not just about the lack, but of what was there, but it also, I think, gave me a sense of what I could do with whatever privilege I would have. Because in graduating from Dartmouth, I realized it was easier for me to get interviews. It was easier for me to get jobs. And that meant something. And so in going into publishing, I'm in academic publishing, and I've been in publishing now for well over 20 years. And what I find very interesting about it is how much it hasn't changed in that time period. I'm still very often the only Asian person in the room. So, and actually there was a recent diversity study that was done in the industry, and one of the, it's fairly homogenous, but apparently for academic publishing, it's gotten less diverse. So we're actually moving backwards. And that was actually what spurred the internship program that a colleague and I had started, because it was a case of that coming out, and we were looking at the lack of diversity and how it was regressing. It was also something where we noticed that people who were leaving publishing that we knew tended to be Black. So there was definitely a sense of what are we not doing as an industry to bring in diversity, but also what are we not doing as an industry to keep people there. And so that's where the internship program came through. And the reason we focused on first generation and limited income is actually my colleague and I who started it. She's actually, she's white. She did not go to an Ivy League school. So she's from southern part of the US and I was from the north. So we had very little in common, except that we ended up working here together. And the more we talked, the more we realized what we did have in common was we both didn't do internships. And that that had more to do with economics than race. And so that's where we started focusing on first generation limited income students, with the idea of all those other aspects of diversity that we're looking to sort of improve upon. They're all going to intersect there at some point.
Yeah.
So, and in terms of telling AAPI stories, just in a nutshell, it's like when I got out of college, most of the books I saw about Vietnam were about the war. And now it's a lot about travel. It was a lot about the language, and now it's about food. So that's where we've come in the past few decades. We've come from the war to travel, and we've come from language to food. And there's a lot in between that isn't there.
Thank you, Zim. And, your and Anton's reflections, make me think about the importance of the kind of scaffolding, the institutional and systemic programs and resources and people that can change, right? Create change, allow for more expression, allow for more stories to be told, allow us to see greater diversity in our workplaces and professional settings. So, thank you for doing that work. And thank you, Anton, for your comments as well. I would like to turn to Jessica Yang, who worked on the Administration, Institutional Support, and Faculty exhibition within the SOCI 76 class. Jessica is a Dartmouth 25 from Dallas. She studies sociology and psychology, and hopes to pursue clinical psychology to address issues related to Asian American mental health. Jessica, in your exhibition, you have documented a very inspiring story of advocacy by students for Asian American studies and other institutional programs. This movement, as we've mentioned, has not been without significant setbacks, but is alive and active today. I know that Dartmouth just hired 2 tenured Asian American as faculty members who will join existing faculty who include Engbeng Lim, Alex Xue, Professor Kim, and other faculty members in working towards establishing Asian American Studies at the college. And I know there's also a fund that the college has worked very hard with alumni directly to establish to support Asian American Studies at Dartmouth. And of course, there are the efforts of DASC, the Asian American Studies Collective. So in working on this exhibition, you interviewed a lot of AAPI alums who advocated for and also took Asian American Studies courses at Dartmouth. I would love to hear from you, how the past connects with you, with what's going on today at Dartmouth, and what has been sort of the impact of taking this course with Professor Kim as you've explored these histories and experiences.
Thank you, Ariel, for your introduction and that insightful question. So a big overarching theme of our section on administration, institutional responses, and faculty is that cyclical nature of the fight for Asian American Studies that Professor Kim was talking about. A particular document that really stuck out to me was from a 2004 Dartmouth article titled College Plans for Asian American Studies. And I remember reading that and seeing that they had this discussion on, oh my gosh, we're going to get an Asian American Studies minor. And here I am, I'm turning 20 this year and still advocating for Asian American Studies. So absolutely, the past does repeat itself. And the hard question that we're trying to address is what barriers have been perpetuating this cycle and how do we learn from the past? So our group pinpointed to barriers in particular, and we like to call them the chicken and egg problems. So the first one is the fallacy of tenure lines and how we need tenure lines to be able to build a program and build this department, but at the same time, we need a program and department to be able to house those tenure lines. So this is an argument that administrators often tout to deter us from institutionalizing Asian American Studies. So our group did a lot of research on Dr. Amy Bong, and in 2016, she was denied tenure despite unanimous support from the English department and students. And we found that this was part of a recurring pattern. From 2002 to 2016, 36 other professors of color left Dartmouth. So it was very emblematic of this constant revolving door of faculty that is exacerbated by the lack of institutional support for ethnic studies and faculty of color. And this is an issue that continues today. Just last month, Dr. Patricia Lopez from the geography department was denied tenure. There's a new group of alumni and students organizing around this issue on so if you would like to support this issue, you can go to tenuredenied.com and write statements of support. But on to the next fallacy. So the fallacy of student interest. Another argument is that how are students, or why should we get the program if we don't know if students are actually interested in this? So we pose the question of how are students supposed to understand what they're missing out on if you're not given the opportunity to learn about Asian American Studies? So in our interviews with alumni and students and my classmates, we found this common sentiment of this sense of enlightenment after taking these classes and this change in academic trajectory and personal understanding, and how this crucial change in perspective pushed students to continue to pursue more classes related to Asian American Studies to better understand their own identities as well as the history of their communities. So for me personally, it was very inspiring to hear their stories. And to speak a little bit about my own journey, I've told Professor Kim this many times, but I would not be a Soci major if it weren't for his classes. I took Soci 48 and that just completely blew my mind because I grew up in a suburb of Dallas, and it was a predominantly white community. So I never really identified with the Asian American label, and I denied my own identity for a long time. And it wasn't until I took Professor Kim's class and that opened a lot of doors for me, where I learned about Asian American history for the very first time. And that really just blew my mind. And I got involved in this class and completely changed my major from econ to soci and psychology, and got involved in the Asian American Studies Collective. So yeah, it was a really life-changing experience. And I think that a lot of my peers had similar experiences. So for the future and where we go from here, I really do think that this class was a lot more than just a class. It was the beginning of building this community. And for me and a lot of my peers, it was very transformative. And something that also stuck with me was in our conversation with Nora Yasamura, I was asking her about how she finds hope, and she gave us a piece of advice of how activism has always been about the relationships. And I would echo that this class and the work that we did, although it was often very emotionally, mentally taxing, that it was the joy of being in community together, our shared enthusiasm and passion that really pushed us to continue. Although it was hard to see that the work is very cyclical and that the past was repeating itself, Professor Kim also offered an enlightening perspective of, okay, but isn't it beautiful that time and time again, and generation after generation of students have continued to find each other and carry on this fight despite all the barriers that we face.
Thank you, Jessica. I mean, it is really significant that we have many generations of Dartmouth students here today who have, been part of the advocacy and who have been part of Dartmouth's history, and that is really inspiring to see. And I would love to turn to Tsering Cornell to kind of provide her reflections. Tsering is an 04. She is now a judge in Clark County, Washington. At Dartmouth, Tsering was involved in many different things, including COSO, and she also served as a Pan-Asian Council intern who worked with Nora. Tsering, can you talk about sort of this sense of community that you found at Dartmouth, which is something that Jessica mentioned, and can you talk about sort of how you and the Pan-Asian Council and Nora supported students engaging in advocacy and activism at the college?
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining, and thank you, Ariel, for moderating this panel. To the students that have worked on this exhibition, I'm so impressed and grateful that you've done this work. Thank you for that. Jessica, it's so wonderful to hear your remarks, and thank you for sharing that piece of the work you've been doing. I've got a couple of thoughts in terms of community. Ariel mentioned a couple of things I was involved with. I want to start out by saying I wouldn't have even made it physically to Dartmouth if it were not for Nora Yasamura and the efforts she made in her role as the Asian American student advisor. I was a prospective student hemming and hawing about how on earth am I going to get from Southwest Washington to Hanover, New Hampshire, and not just physically, logistically, financially, but also culturally. What am I going to do in New Hampshire? Being away from anybody and everybody I know. She was instrumental, and I know that's not isolated or just to me. She was that way with so many of us, and I'm so disappointed to hear that that position is not there, that Opal is not what it used to be. And to echo a lot of what I'm seeing in the comments in the chat, Main Street, the era of Main Street publications, and to see that, I think to some extent we all understand that the college experience, it's a 4-year cycle. We've got a short memory at that, at the undergrad level, but I'm still hopeful that and extremely optimistic after learning about the work you students are doing, that we can build on gains from prior generations. It was encouraging to hear from Doug at the outset about the work he did to start the alumni group, and obviously there's a strong interest and desire from all of us in this community. So when I came to Dartmouth, I felt a level of isolation. I'm a Tibetan American, and so there weren't a whole lot of us. I think at any given time there might have been 2, maybe 3 Tibetan Americans on campus at any given time. We had political groups, we had social groups. I mentioned Nora, but also even before I stepped foot on campus, we got mailed the Dartmouth, right? A copy of the Dartmouth, and the incoming paper for new students included, as many of you know, Mindy Kaling's Badly Drawn Girl. And so, got introduction to the college from Asian American women, and that was really encouraging and helpful. But there were also times where it could feel lonely. And so the Pan-Asian Council was a tremendous help and support in that regard. The other piece is that we're not a monolith. And I think it's easy for the college and administration to just say, treat all these groups similarly, despite what they might be advocating for and their positions. And so I thought the Pan-Asian Council was extremely helpful in that regard to just logistically to make sure we weren't over or double booking programs so that we could get great turnout. People who wanted to go to a culture night may also be interested in a political protest, but we want to be mindful of what our groups, colleagues, friends, and students were doing. So I thought that was a tremendous benefit to the community at large. When I was hearing about the most recent tenure denial, and I'm sad to say this is just my first time learning about it, and I just popped up the link. Thank you for sharing that tenure denial link. I'm extremely disappointed. I was a geography major and ended up doubling in women's studies because I felt like I think we had one person of color in the geography department who was not tenured at that time. I think he did gain tenure at some point, but it's lonely. It's lonely as a student too, and seeing the demographic shift of the college, and not just at Dartmouth but nationally. I'm hoping the college acknowledges and recognizes that our voices matter, and we should have a role in shaping the future of the courses being offered. And so I want to thank the students for what they're doing and encourage fellow alumni to take up arms there too. The other piece, I think I saw Morna Ha on here, and I'm kind of baffled at why I'm talking and not her, because she was everywhere and still is everywhere. And if it weren't for her advocacy, a lot of what we are talking about today, might not be possible. So I'm just grateful that we have such a strong community here and that folks are staying connected. And to the extent it's helpful at all for anybody on the West Coast or in Washington State or interested in the law, one thing that I thought was something that people don't take advantage of as often as maybe we could, that other communities do, whether it's communities of color or just Dartmouth alumni in general, is picking up the phone and calling each other. I think at one point I just started Googling Tibetan names and Dartmouth and trying to find alumni that I could bug and say, how did you do this? How did you get into this field? And I think maybe some of it's cultural, but other pieces involved, because we are such a diverse and oh gosh, I'm going to remember now. Anton, you said it beautifully, prolific but disconnected community. I think getting in front of each other with opportunities like this will help us stay really connected. And I want to offer my personal contact information if I can to connect with anybody who'd like to chat.
Thank you so much, Tsering. I think that the comments that we just heard from you and from Jessica really illustrate, how important the sense of community that we derive from, the AAPI community at Dartmouth. I mean, I know that it was sort of my home at Dartmouth. It was where I got a lot of my leadership opportunities. It was where I sort of came to terms with my identity. I took a couple of Asian American studies classes, one offered by Professor Jeffrey Santa Anna, who basically was at Dartmouth because people like Morna had advocated for Asian American studies. So, I think that we are seeing a lot of movement at the college, and we're really excited for what's to come. And I love this idea that, that part of activism is finding our communities and finding our relationships. So thank you both for those reflections. I want to call now on Rachel. Rachel is a 25 who worked on the sexual assault, discrimination, and hate against Asian Americans at Dartmouth exhibition. Rachel is from the Virginia and Maryland area, and she is a double major in history and philosophy. On campus, she is involved in the Dartmouth Asian American Studies Collective and language instruction. Rachel hopes to pursue scholarship and teaching in Asian American history. So Rachel, I'm wondering if you can address the question of whether there was information that your cohort discovered that you found particularly surprising in the course of working on the exhibition. And I would also like to ask you to share just your personal reflections on what questions arose for you that you think need to be addressed going forward.
Sure. Thank you for the introduction and for that question. I think for me, at least the most surprising thing was the result from Susan Marine's report, which was published in 2000. It was independently published by the Sexual Abuse Awareness Program, and Susan Marine was the coordinator, and she's also not Asian. And this report was published in 2000, and it took data from 1996 and to 99. And what it found was that at its peak, Asian women accounted for 40% of reported sexual assault cases from 96 to 97. And this was at a time when Asian women accounted for only 12% of all undergraduate women at Dartmouth. So that was really shocking. But that research was super important. And I'll also mention that the most recent data we have on that has specific racial demographic breakdowns is from 2015, and it is on Dartmouth's Office of Institutional Research website, and it's called the Association of American Universities Report on Sexual Assault and Sexual Misconduct for Dartmouth. Yeah, so that's the most recent available data, and what we realized was on the survey questions as well as the survey results, you can see Asian as an option, as well as Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander as a demographic group. So that comes out in the survey question as well as the survey result. And there's a statistic you can see, but the problem is in the report itself, when you read it, it quite blatantly states that the research procedure was conducted with 5 variables, and it was Hispanic, white, Black, other race, and non-resident alien. And so Asian is not included, Pacific Islander is not included during the procedure of data synthesis and analysis. And apparently this was because they had to adjust to previous models of data synthesis. Yeah, and so when the procedure quite literally excludes Asian and Pacific Islander, as well as Indigenous people, it's concerning because the college can simply say, look, here's the racial demographic breakdown on sexual misconduct. On the outside, it kind of looks like the college is doing everything right. But when you read the report itself, you can see that Asians and Pacific Islanders were unmistakably excluded from the procedure. And I think, the issue is that I'm not really sure where these percentages really came from. We don't know what they're doing internally with, this racial data that they're collecting. And we also don't know where multiracial individuals fall under, or how they were taken into account when those 5 variables were used. And so in contrast with Susan Marine's report, which was, it was with individual testimonies, actually, there's like a stark contrast. And so I guess when it comes to my own personal reflections and questions that that arose, I think something huge that came up in my mind was why is it that the college can pick and choose when Asian people are considered a minority, and when does this exactly occur? And from my perspective, you can see it all the time, the hypocrisy of the college. For instance, when it comes to diversity and inclusion efforts, when it comes to admissions pamphlets and advertising and social media, DOC maybe, Asians and Pacific Islanders are a minority. The college likes to really boast on social media that they're supporting things like, a Thai cultural event or the luau, or, you can see Asian faces all over Dartmouth's Instagram, along with other people of color. And on the other hand, just an example to illustrate, but I'm not sure if you all know about this, but this April, the provost sent out a study conducted in 2021 on mental health. And this was a mental health survey, and for certain questions, you were able to see the racial demographic breakdown of the responses. But the way the results were organized were A, underrepresented minorities, and then B, Asian Americans and whites. And the language what used was quite literally underrepresented minorities, a statistic, compared to Asian Americans, a statistic, and whites. Yeah, and so I think this language of the college is really revealing. I know that amongst my circles, we were pretty outraged by this, and I don't think it would have been tolerated at other campuses at all. And so I think, we should really think about how to get the college to confront the fact that they are picking and choosing when Asians are a minority. We can think about how Asian faces are used as a pawn by Dartmouth specifically, why people can tolerate that Asian people are being excluded from research procedures on sexual assault data. But yeah, those are just my thoughts, but thank you for that question.
No, thank you, Rachel. This is, I think, clearly, I think for many people, many of us had very positive experiences. Many of us also had very negative experiences at Dartmouth. And I think that, there are painful memories that are part of the institutional history of Asian Americans at Dartmouth. And it's, very important that you guys, were able to grapple with this history. And I'm sure it was, an emotional process for you all. And I really appreciate that, especially, I think that part of what you said speaks to, gaps in representation. And I think it also speaks to the fact that there's a lot of work to be done, and that is being done by individuals and groups and at the college itself. And, with that, I would like to turn to Curtis Takata-Rooks, who's a 79. Curtis is a professor of Asian American Studies. He speaks and teaches on multiracial identity and trans-Pacific identity, Asian Pacific Americans, diversity and inclusion and equity. Among other civic activities, Curtis serves on the Gates Millennium Scholars Program, National Advisory Council, and the US-Japan Council. And he's also involved in both the Black Alumni Association at Dartmouth and with DAPAAA. So Curtis, speaking to Rachel's reflections, can you comment on the importance of representation and sort of how things have changed since your time at Dartmouth? And can you tell us sort of a story about representation, either from your time at Dartmouth or now?
Okay. Well, I am so happy to be able to join you today. I'm joining you from Japan, where I'm actually a guest professor at Sophia University in Asian American Studies. And it just so happened that in that class yesterday, I have a class on race and representations of Asian American Studies, and we looked at a video by MC Jin and Wycliffe Jean about sort of Stop Asian Hate. But in the context of looking more at sort of what have been the images and what has been the discourse about Asian, particularly Asian women throughout US history. And so in that conversation, as I listened to read Rachel's work in the exhibit and then listened to her recount this story, it touched on what we did yesterday in the class, and that you can start to begin to draw a line from the 1875 Page Law, which excluded Chinese women from immigration under the guise of them that if Chinese woman, then prostitute. And the way in which Asian women have been sexualized, exotically sexualized, and vilified throughout their time, throughout our history in the United States, that when that first set of data that came out, that's a 40% were Asian women, was not surprising. And it was heartbreaking and sad and angering. In my career, I've also served as a Dean of Residential Life and Associate Dean of Students at Pomona College, where we were able to start the first API graduation. Under my tenure, we laid the foundation for the Asian American Mentor Program, which has staffing and a place on campus, so that there's an institutional support for the Asian American students to bring those sort of creative individuals into collective spaces that allow for sort of Pan-Asian stuff, and also to be able to elevate the need for disaggregated data, elevate the need for support for Asian women within the context where they're constantly being sexualized in ways that are hideous. And so I think one of the things that I would want to say, particularly to the men who are on this audience, this is not a woman's problem. Too often we put it off as, well, that's a woman's problem. This is a people problem. This is our problem. Our sisters, our mothers, our daughters, ourselves are diminished when this happens. And it's in the context of as Rachel said, sort of within sort of endemic of larger issues, whether it's disaggregated data, where we are able to be erased. And because when the data is not disaggregated, whether it's just Asian or other alien, the importance of the individuals, the sort of both group and individual situations just disappears, and allows an institution to no longer sort of take action on it because they don't know what they can't know. I firmly believe I would opine one of the reasons of the shift in the data was that the data that was shown in that early study was so heavily an indictment to Dartmouth as a patriarchal institution, as well as sort of the ways in which history has offered up Asian women as sort of exotic sexualization in the service of males, and in particular white males in the US. And that's the history. I mean, that data just speaks to that history. And of course, you can hide behind, well, we had to have it match with other databases so it could be compatible. Given that Dartmouth is the heart of some of the first great supercomputing used at Kiewit, they can collect the disaggregated data, run an algorithm, tab it, then fit the form that they need it to fit for whatever reporting they have to do. So to me, that's just blatant. And having taken classes with Sleznick and those guys who taught me how to program, I can say that's blatant bullshit. Best academic word I could come up with. But it's just, there's no excuse. And that we have such, particularly given the coding talent that is at Dartmouth. And so I guess I'll end my comments by saying that these issues aren't going to go away without our collective voice. Without our collective voice, and looking at ways where we can also sort of lean in and use our shoulders to help create the solution as well. And that's why I think this class, the work that you've done, Rachel, the work that Jessica and Jesse are doing is invaluable. And I'm hoping that as the Dartmouth student of today and God help us, the faculty, maybe read the exhibits and read particularly Rachel's exhibits, that they too will feel the same anger that I'm feeling right now.
Thank you, Curtis, and thank you, Rachel. It definitely makes me think about, the importance of visibility and representation in things that may seem facially neutral, like statistics, and collecting data on sexual assault. I mean, I think it's inspiring to see that, Rachel and Curtis, you're using the tools that you learned at Dartmouth as part of our educations to elevate these issues, to analyze them critically. I mean, I think that's what Dartmouth provided for us. And at the same time, we turned the lens back on the institution that, gave us a lot, but in other ways also has room to grow. So I really appreciate both of your comments and your continued elevation of support for equitable data collection and elevating support for AAPI women. So thank you. And I would now like to turn to our final student panelists and alumni panelists, Jessie Yu. Jessie is a 25. Jessie worked on the Student Groups, Networks, and Solidarity exhibition. Jessie studies sociology, government, and history. She's involved with the Outing Club, Chamber Orchestra, the Center for Social Impact, Sexual Assault Prevention on campus, and Jessie also does costume design with the theater department. Jessie, with respect to the exhibit that you worked on, many of the alums that I've talked to have commented that seeing the timeline of student groups that your cohort compiled has been really moving and powerful, and that seeing their time at Dartmouth documented in this way has been very validating. Can you talk about what themes were revealed for you through your work on the exhibition, and what is sort of for you the personal importance of documenting and preserving the histories of AAPI groups and institutions?
Yeah, thank you so much for that introduction. I think a big thing that we noticed and a general trend we saw with not just our specific exhibit, but the entire exhibit is just this very, very vicious cycle of Asian clubs and organizations being created and then dissolving in a few years, only to then have to be recreated, and everything has to be kind of started from scratch. And we noticed that this was due to a very wide variety of factors, but predominantly a lack of support from like administration, or even like the existence of adult allies within faculty. And then on top of that, just the lack of solidarity and unity within the Asian diaspora, which I think highlights the need for an Asian American Studies department, not just to learn about our own collective Asian identities, but also to learn about how Asian American studies and Asian American existences in this country are intersected with Latin American studies and African American studies, as well as Native American studies, and the study of just marginalized people in this country, that helps paint a truer and more realistic version of what America actually is. And I think even as we were looking at this, very long list and definitely non-exhaustive list of clubs and organizations, there seemed to just be no like physical evidence of their existence. And much of the knowledge that we have about different organizations comes from either word of mouth or from things that we've heard during our time here. And so our goal really came from wanting to create a place that would make it easier for current and future students to replicate and build off of the work and advocacy that those before them had done. And I think additionally to looking through the exhibit again and looking back at many of our interviews, many of whom are actually on the Zoom today, it gave us really, really wonderful insight into what it means to be Asian American at Dartmouth, where the spaces that we inhabit, whether it be Greek life or other social spaces, are, constantly labeled as alternative or othered, and where we are always forced to kind of replicate or create alternatives to white spaces. And also just where our needs are always seen as second class, which I think is very, very represented in the fact that the only Asian American affinity space on this entire campus is a single room in Robo that is like no more than maybe 250 square feet. And I just really feel like as we continue to call for more Asian stories to be heard, for more Asian voices and spaces and unity and the institutionalization of the Asian American studies, the more we recognize just, how pivotal Asians are to the Dartmouth community, both socially and academically. And I hope that comes with also the recognition that we deserve space in academia and our histories deserve to be taught. And I think from what Jess has said, a class like this is incredibly impactful, not just for students to recognize, their own identities, but I come from the Bay Area where a lot of people are Asian. And I think coming to Dartmouth, I was very unaware of where my Asian identity sat in respect to whiteness, and navigating that as a first year, navigating that as a first generation low income student. And also so as an Asian student, I think is really, really challenging when you don't know or realize where you come from, which I feel like is why I'm so grateful to Professor Kim and to Daniel for, allowing us the space to really, really reflect and come together as, people from across this country, across the diaspora, to really learn and reflect and be introspective about what our goals are as Asians on this campus. And
yeah, thank you so much, Jessie. I love what you said about the process of exploring history and looking at, what has come before, being illuminating in terms of, where we're going and, where we come from, because I think many of us probably think of where we're from as, the place where our parents are from or the place we grow up. But I think that, Dartmouth is a little bit like Hogwarts in that, we sort of come home to Dartmouth, and the people that came before us at Dartmouth are part of our histories. So thank you for those comments. And I want to turn to Amita Kulkarni, who's a 10. Amita is a physician. She is an OBGYN. Amita is an advocate for women's health. As a student at Dartmouth, she was very, very involved with the South Asian community at Dartmouth, including in Millen. Amita, can you talk a bit about yourself, sort of how you grew from your experiences at Dartmouth in the South Asian community, and share, thoughts and feelings that came to mind when you went through the archive?
Well, first off, thank you, Jessie, so much for presenting just in such an eloquent way how meaningful the student groups at Dartmouth were. I think specifically for me, similar to DM Bloom speaking, I grew up in a predominantly white town in New Jersey, small white town in New Jersey. I was the only Indian kid in my entire high school. And so when I came to Dartmouth, I was actually pleasantly surprised with how many people I saw that looked like me. And for the first time, I really felt like I had a community of people that were like brothers and sisters to me. And it was, I think the South Asian community at Dartmouth was such a transformative aspect of my time. Forming relationships with other members of the South Asian community is what allowed me to also start exploring my own culture and heritage a little more through Asian and Middle Eastern studies, and taking, coursework, and then ultimately, majoring in Asian and Middle Eastern studies with a focus on South Asia was really all, for me to better understand and appreciate my culture and heritage, despite knowing that I was, going to go into medicine right from the start. It really enriched my time. My time at Dartmouth involved specifically with Millen was, like I said, some of the most fun experiences I had, whether we were doing a culture night, which is, sad to hear that culture nights are not necessarily, as prevalent anymore as they used to be, to just cooking Indian food with members of my South Asian community, in Cask and Gauntlet. I remember we'd go down to the kitchen and cook food for each other. They're memories that I carry with me and really were formative. And then, getting involved with the Pan Asian Council and working so closely with Nora, who, everybody has said this, but is just such a role model, personally and professionally, for me personally, really working to, recognize that the various student, groups that were part of the Pan Asian community were unique and individual, but also we were a group together. And so we did a lot of coalition building where we would have, Millen would join forces with Dow, and we'd have, events together, or we would even expand outside of the Asian community and reach out to other communities at Dartmouth to really show that we could, have fun, work together. And it just, I felt like brought me closer together with not only the Asian community, but just like the greater Dartmouth student community. So, it's definitely hard to hear that some of these student groups are no longer, because it does, it kind of points to how important it is to have champions and leadership at an institutional level. Nora was that for us, and Opal and PAC were that for us. And so when you don't have that leadership from the top, it's hard, to really continue that momentum as, students kind of rotate in and out on different times that they're on campus, they're not, then they graduate. So, I feel very lucky for my time, and I hope that other students now can still feel that sense of community.
Thank you so much, Amita. What you said about having champions. I mean, I know a lot of people in this room are being champions for each other, and elevating issues relating to our community and broader communities. Working on intersectionality. So, I think a lot of it is sort of like the vocabulary and the experiences that we had at Dartmouth are helping us, do that now. So it's amazing to see all the work that people are doing. And, we've mentioned Nora a lot tonight, so I'm going to put her on the spot and ask her to say a couple of words, about in particular, the sort of role of archiving, which is what this class did, the recording of Asian American histories at Dartmouth, and the sort of validation of the experiences that many of us had, whether good, bad, mixed, everywhere. Nora.
Well, thank you. So thank you all for your thoughtful comments and the work of the class. I mean, it was such an honor to be able to go up there physically, to meet the students, to hear, your commitment and passion. And again, thank you, Professor Kim, for continuing to mentor and lead them. And of course, for Daniel, this is really something that wouldn't have happened if Daniel didn't really listen inward to sort of say, I'm curious. And I think that was always my experience of Dartmouth students, was people being curious about themselves, curious about their community. The tremendous commitment to want to make their lives better, but the lives around them, not just at Dartmouth. I mean, it's so exciting for me, I think I came in the fall of '99, so it's over 20 years, to sort of watch and see how Dartmouth alums have continued to take the skills and insights and give it back to the world. And that kind of ecosystem, I mean, I'm a person who really believes in collectivism and the power of collectivism that was mentioned earlier, really about thinking about how important it is to be connected to what the current students are doing. I have to say the current students were sharing, that they are feeling burnt out. And that's not a new thing, unfortunately. That is something that I had many, many students through the years, still alums who will reach out that I'm so grateful to continue to have connections to. But I think, I guess, for me, I encourage alums to get involved, to see that ecosystem, to know. I always sort of felt and said to the students when I was working with students in the current day was, you stand on the shoulders of the people, I stand on the shoulders of people before you. People were there before. When we were talking about the statistics of students who were sexually assaulted, I mean, I just was sort of like pausing to think how courageous of those women in that context to come forward and speak their truth. There's a lot of courageous people. I have met so many amazing alums who stayed up really late beyond their own capacity because they understood that there was a truth. And so when I was up on campus and I met students and seeing your passion, I think, Professor Kim said this in the beginning, that is energizing. And yet it's really sad to me. I always sort of felt like when I was there, like, people know this, but one of my mantras was like, run the marathon of this issue, run the marathon of activism. Do not burn yourself out at Dartmouth. Get a degree, go on and continue to make an impact. So I'll just leave those words, but it's really mostly just huge gratitude. And I think I just want to say it out loud, but I put it in the chat. I really want to give a shout out to Holly Satay, who was the Dean of Students. She's recently passed away. But to be honest, from my perspective, if Holly had not, like when we were talking about structural and the importance of senior administrators paving the way and the importance of allyship, Holly was that person. Holly held me up when I wanted to quit some days, Holly fought behind the curtain to make sure that the visibility of the Pan Asian community was always there. And I just really wanted to make sure that we don't, in the context of archives and history. And she was the one who told me, if you don't write it down, it didn't exist. Dartmouth cares about the history and we need to be present. And that's why I kept almost every single poster I get my hands on, and I wrote diligent annual reports. And I didn't realize at the time that they would ever be seen again. So anyway, make a mental note, current students, be careful what you write down. Hopefully you write good things, but I tried to be honest and straightforward. And again, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nora. And I should have introduced you before I asked you to speak, but Nora was the Assistant Dean of Student Life and advisor to Asian American students at Dartmouth for over 12 years. I remember when Nora's daughter was born and she's now a college student. So I performed at her birthday party. Under Laura's leadership, Dartmouth was named one of the best colleges and universities for Asian Pacific Americans. And Nora worked on a lot of very important collegiate level resources at Dartmouth, including the Diversity Peer Leadership Network, the First Generation College Student Network, and the Inter-Community Council, as well as the Pan-Asian Wellness Initiative. So thank you, Nora, for your services to us. You've mentored generations of Dartmouth students, so thank you. And I think with that, I will just say thank you so much to all of our student panelists and alum panelists. You've been really brave, you've been really candid, you've been just absolutely incredible in sharing your thoughts, your experiences, and just being really open, because it's hard to reflect on some of the painful parts of our Dartmouth experiences. And I also want to thank the audience for engaging with us so much. And with sticking with us. I know we're a little bit over time, so really appreciate it. And this is the first of many events that we're going to have that kind of speak to what Nora mentioned, which is curiosity about what are the questions that come up when you reflect on Dartmouth. So what are the things that you hope to see? I think that one theme that I noticed tonight is just this drive and desire for engagement and positive change. And, it's just really, really inspiring to see all the work everyone continues to do with open eyes. And yeah, I'm just so grateful that you allowed me to be your moderator tonight. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Sarah Gupta, who's one of the co-chairs of DAPAAA, and she's going to give us a little preview of what's to come for the 25th anniversary of DAPAAA. Sarah?
Thanks, Ariel. Thanks for moderating tonight. And again, thanks to everyone who put this event together and to all the work of everyone involved in Soci 76 class. It's really amazing and really impressive what you all have done. And this is it's just really the timing of our event and our theme of our history, our voices, our future. I think as the AAPI community is constantly talking about this theme of feeling invisible and needing to rise up and join together. And so it's really important that we archive our history and we learn from the past and continue to work together towards a better future. We're really excited. Please note in the chat, we've dropped our social media links and our email. The 25th coming up, we'll be having a series of year-long virtual events. The next event will be sometime this summer. We're planning on doing a green table talk with some alums from different decades. So if you enjoyed hearing the different perspectives here, you'll definitely enjoy that talk as well. In October, we'll be working on an event
with the Dartmouth Club of Hawaii on the Pacific Islander experience. And we have many more events to come. So thanks to everyone again for staying over a little bit. We are also, of course, George Takei in May. We're very excited to see him. We'll see who else we can get in the meantime. But DAPAAA has continued to support Asian American studies and has been fighting for Asian American studies for a long time now. But that has there's been a resurgence in the last few years. So thank you, Morna Ha, for leading that charge. Thank you to DASC and all of our faculty supporters of Asian American Studies, our postdocs, our faculty, Angbang Lim, Professor Alexander Chi, our new profs who are joining the charge. There's a lot of names, so I want to hold everyone back. And again, thanks to Alumni Relations, who's working with us to put on this DAPAAA 25 event, which is the first one of its kind, but we are confident it will be a success. And thanks to our advancement team at Dartmouth, who has helped us start our AAPI fund. And thank you to the donors of that fund. And also to the Dean's Office and Associate Dean Matt Delmont for sponsoring the class, the Sociology 76 class, as well as the students' recent trip to the Asian American Studies Association meeting. And yeah, thank you all for your support. Really wonderful to connect with you all on this Monday evening, and we hope to be in touch soon.
Thank you all so much. Have a good night and stay tuned for a lot more. And come to the reunion in person in 2024. May 3rd to 5th.
Thank you.
Thank you.